Before we can begin to talk about what is a space for teaching, we will first have to think about what will be the future of our education against our current social ecological background. In the space where education on climate change mitigation and architecture overlap, there is green architecture, which is an approach to building that minimizes the harmful effects of construction projects on our environment. But this spectrum of color should be expanded to accommodate more than just one class of building that passively assure ecological health, but a full category of functionality that actively recovers our geo-conditions. For instance, there should be a spectrum of green architecture that is not only designed for energy efficiency, but actively functions to facilitate, let's say, regenerative agriculture. There can be red architecture, which functions for forest fire resistance, brown architecture, which functions for soil carbon sequestration, blue architecture, which functions for 𝘨𝘚𝘌𝚑𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚗𝚒 fertilization, yellow architecture for carbon capturing, so on and so on. So these are just some examples that I'm proposing. But what would be a learning space to teach such form of architecture, where architecture is formally defined to be an interdisciplinary subject? Before we can look at how such spaces can look like, let's first look at the industrial demand for such form of architectural education, which is going to show us in a more concrete manner the significance of this within our work society. So how much human, architectural, infrastructural, and economic capital will such an active decarbonization system demand? Let's take the yellow architecture as an example, which is the architecture for carbon capturing. According to 𝘨𝘠𝚌𝚑𝚒𝚒𝚒 under our 2 degrees Celsius carbon budget, we will have to capture and remove 100 gigaton of CO2 in our atmosphere. To capture 1 gigaton will demand about 1,000 facilities. To capture 10 gigaton by the end of the century, which is 2100, we will need about 10,000 facilities starting from this moment. Right now, we have about 22. So we are kind of behind schedule. This means that we will need not only architecture, but a whole set of infrastructure on the order of the existing fossil fuel industry. As we all know, it took more than a century for our fossil fuel industry to get to where we are today, but we don't have another century to lose. In order to realize this amount of work by 2100, our architecture education is at the forefront. How many do we have to educate in what ways in order to decarbonize? Do not forget, this is just one example of yellow architecture. We still have green, red, brown, blue, and hopefully many more. So that's an economy of architectural education in itself. We will need a large capacity of architects who are equipped with such form of interdisciplinary knowledge to design a spectrum of decarbonization architecture. But the subject of concern is still on the table. What are the qualities that such spaces of interdisciplinary teaching ought to have? So this is the current space where I spent most of my time being taught. It's being designed to work in silos and to direct our attention to the front of the room. Our current pedagogical spaces is being arranged in a rather modernist zoning, where every department has its own enclosed space. Such form of physical arrangement does not permit much of real-time knowledge transfer between disciplines. We will need new forms of interdisciplinary architecture. Not in the sense that we just tear down all the walls and make one mega open plan building where we can all hear each other. I can't even imagine the noise pollution level with 1,000 students in the same room, let alone 10,000 or more. But that we should have both soft and hard architecture to leverage between their distinct potential and constraints. For instance, we can design a soft architecture in the form of an app that can help us to navigate pedagogical events and spaces within our hard architecture, so that events within various disciplines is accessible to each other while keeping the walls doing what they do best, which is to shut out excessive noise within information systems. UCL has an app, but it's being designed in the same way our current physical spaces are. Everything that happens in other departments are as opaque as the wall of my classroom. So it is to my impression that the app does not necessarily do more than what my physical space can offer. The subtext here, which is completely irrelevant to the subject of concern, is that I have my personal struggles with Moodle and its PHP, let alone have it embedded in an app. Anyway, I've gone too far. The point being, To provide transparency and accessibility to interdisciplinary teaching, we will need not only interfaces that provide useful navigational strategies, we will need not only a common knowledge database, a common data environment, but we will also need means to direct knowledge to those who will potentially demand it, or else it would just be information overload for all of us. We need both soft and hard architecture that direct knowledge, so that as a student, I don't come out of an app or come out of a room not knowing what I don't know, which is kind of the case for the majority of my academic career. For instance, as an architecture student, how do I know that I might need to know about carbon capturing? Such form of knowledge encounter should not be solely a chance occurrence, but a form of directed knowledge. There should be a means to personalize teaching, personalize knowledge, so that we can aggregate data on disciplinary connections, so that we shift focus from personal data collection to disciplinary data collection, and then to redistribute physical spaces according to such form of pedagogical network, and to translate our interdisciplinary networks into our spaces of teaching. So this is a Leech lattice, which is a topology that has the greatest density for the sphere packing problem. What this potentially implies in spatial term is that this is an optimal networking system to which our sciences can comprehend for now. Although this image is a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional representation of a four-dimensional projection of a 24th dimensional object, which basically means it's quite a long shot before we can make this topology operational. But imagine what disciplinary avenue this one single networking system can open up in terms of spatial configurations. The amount of information in this one single image is too complex and high-dimensional, so I only took a section of the network topology and tried to remap the UCL spatial configuration on various projections of it. Right now, this remains an artistic expression, but I'm sure that in the near future, it will advance beyond this. To summarize in one sentence, or two sentences, our current social ecological condition demands interdisciplinary education. The spaces of such forms of teaching should have components of both soft and hard architecture. Together, they can provide accessibility to knowledge across disciplinary and geographical boundaries, and translate the logics of our pedagogical network into the physical distribution of spaces. Thank you.